My name is Jenny Matz, and I'm here today interviewing Nancy Cartwright for the Archive of American Television in Northridge, California, and the date is March 17th, 2011. Again, thank you, Nancy, very much for giving us your time today. Could you tell us, please, what was your name at birth?
Okay, sure. Nancy Jean Cartwright.
And your parents' names, and what did they do?
My dad's Frank Cartwright, and my mom, Miriam Cartwright. But my mother, my birth mother actually passed away in '78, and my dad has since remarried, so I have another mom, and her name is Marilyn. My dad was, he was in the printing business. He was in sales. And my mom was a homemaker, housewife. I'm one of 6 kids.
And do you think you inherited any particular traits from your parents?
Probably if I inherited anything maybe from my dad, I probably got a good part of my sense of humor from my dad, and learning how to whistle and do some sound effects, and I would say probably my dad inspired me that way. My mom, I tended to look more like my mom. So just, we were about the same size.
And your interests as a kid, did you have hobbies, or what did you spend your time doing?
Yeah, I did. I was pretty active as a kid. When I was really little, you know, in the neighborhood, we lived in a fantastic neighborhood. It was sort of like Springfield. And all the kids, we had, you know, Millhouses and Kearneys and a few Nelson Munces and, you know, a lot of Lisa Simpsons and some Bart Simpsons thrown in there. But I lived in a very rich neighborhood in terms of just a lot of kids. We played all kinds of games. We rode bikes a lot. We did lots of outdoor sports. My backyard butted up against a field that was owned by a radio station, WING Wing in it in Dayton, Ohio, as the Wright brothers were born in Dayton, Ohio. So there were these 2 transmitting towers that were situated in this giant field, and so that field became our playground. So in the wintertime when it snowed, we would go up there and we would go sledding, because there was a church at the top of the hill, and we'd go sliding down. We also would take the lawnmower out there and cut out a baseball diamond or do a football field or whatever, and we would play games out there. It was amazing. Great place to grow up.
Yeah. Could you say the name of the town that you grew up in?
I grew up just south of Dayton in Kettering.
Kettering,
Ohio.
Ohio, right.
Charles F. Kettering, the inventor of the automatic starter for your car.
Oh, fun fact. And we'll get back to Wing in a little bit later on, but do you recall some of the shows on television that you watched as a child?
Yeah, I loved, I remember watching That Girl and Love American Style, The Brady Bunch, Partridge Family, Courtship of Eddie's Father. I actually remember a show that didn't last very long called My Mother the Car. What else did I watch? Cartoon-wise, I mean, Saturday morning, I live for Saturday mornings. Love the Flintstones because of Pebbles and Bam Bam. The Jetsons. Haji and what was that? The dog. Johnny Quest. That was on Friday nights. I kind of remember that on Friday night. Looney Tunes, the Warner Brothers stuff. Yogi Bear. Even younger, Black and White. I remember seeing Mickey Mouse Club, and loved the adventures of the Hardy Boys, and you know, I kind of remember that. That was fun. Yeah.
Did that acting bug bite you at that young age, or did you watch these cartoons and mimic any of the voices you were hearing at that age?
You know what? When I was really little, I didn't really connect that there were actors doing those voices. We just lived for the cartoons. Those images were, you know, they were brought to life. And it's not that I like analyzed it and said, oh, you know, these are cartoon characters. I just watched the cartoons and enjoyed them. But at some point, I remember thinking, oh, wow, I could get paid to do that, that would be fun to do. But that was much, much later. The acting bug, when did that hit me? I mean, I was not really shy as a kid. I was very involved in a lot of things. I started to play the trumpet when I was 10 years old. I was the only female trumpet player in the band in the 4th grade. And that was, I remember that was, I guess it was a bit of a novelty, although it's not why I did it. I just wanted to play the trumpet. I got a flute for Christmas, and I thought it was kind of wimpy. And I pretended like my fingers didn't reach the keys. And I told my mom, I can't play this. And she said, what do you want to play? And I said, the trumpet. And the look of horror on her face, you know. It was very Simpsonian, though. Because I remember going back to the music store, and the guy that owned the store, it was Howard's Music on Far Hills. I remember it specifically, going in there and him looking at my mom saying, don't worry, see, if she can get a sound out of this trumpet, you should probably let her play. And I took the mouthpiece and I got this amazing sound out of it. And he looked at me and looked at my mom. She should play the trumpet. So that was cool. I played the trumpet. Gymnastics, I love gymnastics, very athletic. By the time I was in 7th grade, I was a cheerleader. The public school, I had gone to Catholic school for a while, but then transferred over to the public school system. But they had a little bit more to offer me at the time in terms of fun things to do. I got on the speech team and did the junior class play and the senior class play. But I loved the speech team. And that's where I found that I had this ability to change my voice.
Do you remember some of those first voices that you experimented with?
Yeah, I do. The one story that I told was called Many Moons by James Thurber. It's just a children's story, but it's really kind of an adult children's story in that you could read it to a kid, but it had great lessons to it. And there was a king, he had a little girl, a princess, Princess Lenore, and then there was the royal magician, the royal mathematician, there was the court jester and the king. So I did all these male voices, and the only female I did was Princess Lenore. And I just kind of find that interesting, you know, in retrospect. I go, wow, even then I kind of did these male voices, and I didn't think anything of it. It's just telling a story. And the judges would write comments to me saying, you've got an unusual voice, you should do cartoons, you know. I'm like, whoa, that's a cool idea.
And this was all on the speech team that you were in high school?
It was on the speech team, and I was a sophomore, and I did really, really well. So my brothers were bringing home trophies for Little League and Soapbox Derby, and I'm bringing home first place in humorous interpretation, you know, dramatic duo. And it was fun because it was the school's dime. We got to spend the night at a motel with all of our friends, eat pizza, sit next to the boy that I had a crush on, you know, and compete against other. It was just such a fun, clean, and enlightening kind of activity to do. It was great.
And in getting these responses back from the teachers, when did you sort of connect that this could be a career, that you could get paid to do these voices?
Well, several times the judges would make the same comment about the quality of my voice. And I knew that there was something different about my voice, because I remember even being about 7 and people saying they couldn't tell if I was a boy or a girl by the way I talked. And there was something about, and I think I had a very androgynous sort of sound. And because I had a pixie haircut, my mom always kept it short. I remember going to the post office and the clerk at the post office saying to me, here you go, Sonny. And I'm like, I'm not a Sonny, I'm a girl. That kind of pissed me off a little bit.
No,
but
yeah, go ahead.
No, I just knew that there was something unusual about the quality of my voice, and I also really loved to make people laugh. And that was the main thing. It wasn't so much acting as it was saying something that took somebody from just like like having a hum-ho day to kind of brightening them up a little bit. I liked creating effects that would make people happy. So it was sometimes telling bad jokes or funny jokes or doing some kind of pantomime. I remember watching Laugh-In, and Laugh-In was great because I remember watching Ruth Buzzy and Artie Johnson. They would do that old lady, I think Gladys Ormsby, and I forget his name, but they would do this sketch together, and I got my older brother Steve, to like do this, and we would do it for relatives, and we'd dress up like the dirty old man and Gladys Ormsby, and I would put the voice on and everything, and everybody loved it. Of course, that's my family, but
But they were encouraging, it sounds like.
it was the right thing.
So now, how did you go from high school to wanting to pursue something related to making people laugh and being an entertainer? Did you think about that in terms of college, or what was the next step for you?
Yeah, I actually did. Well, when I was in high school, I did so well with the high school speech team that I was offered a scholarship to go to Ohio University. And so basically I ended up doing the same thing but on a grander scale. And at that time, I knew I wanted to go to university. I didn't know what I was going to study. You don't study, cartoon voices, but I got on the speech team, and I was a general communications major. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with it, but that summer before I went off to school, I ran into the president and general manager of the radio station that was positioned right behind my house. And I was scooping ice cream at a friendly ice cream store, and he came in, and he knew who I was because our families had gone to the same church, and he knew who I was because of that, the field that was behind our house. And he had to come in, and we had to do a whole town meeting in our backyard because they had to put up a fence, like a 6-foot fence, to separate our private properties from the field, and our playground was pretty much taken away from us. It was devastating, but he was such a great guy. He said, I'll kind of look the other way if you want to put a little step ladder over it. And we did. We still got to do it.
Wow.
Yeah, Jim Bennett. He was a good guy. Really good guy.
Jim Bennett. So did you know that Jonathan Winters had worked there at the same radio station?
I'm trying to think if I knew at that time. I think that's actually when I found out that he'd worked there, but he didn't work in the same building. He worked in downtown Dayton and definitely had a reputation of being such a practical joker. I mean, they told me one time he actually brought a horse up the steps because the radio station was on the second story, and he brought a horse up into the studio. He drove Jim Bennett nuts. Another time he took a bowling ball, and when Jim Bennett was doing the news, he was like I think the news and weather guy. Jonathan Winters took a bowling ball and started just slowly to roll the bowling ball across the floor. And Jim's looking, he couldn't figure out what it was. I mean, that must have been amazing. But then later on, I actually ended up working with Jonathan Winters and brought that. I told him, we have some past together, and I reminded him of that. I told him those stories. I know all about you, and he ended up hiring me to work with him, Gambier College in Kenyon, Ohio, and I just went back one summer to go play with him in some improv troupe. That was a blast.
Yeah, that was amazing to see. So going back to WING, how did you get hired to start working there? Can you talk a bit about the recurring character you developed?
Yeah. Well, Jim Bennett knew that I wanted to, that I was going to be a communications major. And he said, well, look, I've got this radio station. We're always looking for somebody to come in and fill in for people that go on vacation. It'd be a part-time job, meaning that it would be full-time in the summer, but it would just be, for about 3 months in the summer. And I'm like, well, yeah, that sounds great. So that next summer I started, and I filled in for virtually every post. Everybody that went on vacation, I kind of learned every aspect of the radio business. So from doing reception to accounting, which was my least favorite, I got to schedule some of the commercials. That's called the trafficking department. So I got to schedule all the commercials. But my boss said, we'd like to get you on the air. Would you like to do something like that? And I'm like, oh my gosh, yes. So I was secretly going up to the radio station at night and fooling around with equipment and fooling around with my voice. And so he put me on the air, and I did the afternoon drive time show with a fellow named Ken Warren. And at the time I think it was 18, and he was probably 40. He's probably in his mid 40s. I had the hugest crush on this guy. I had such a crush on him, and to work next to him, my little fragile heart, it was just, anyway, it was kind of interesting. But he was so kind to me, and I told him about my dreams that I wanted to go to California. And a woman had come in to the radio station, and she was promoting music for Warner Brothers. And Warner Brothers to me meant Mel Blanc. He did all those characters that I had grown up with, and I thought, oh my gosh, maybe she knows Mel Blanc, and maybe somehow she can connect me up with him. She gave me her business card, and she said, send me a tape, and I can get it to the right department. I'm not in animation, but I can get it to the right department, and maybe you can meet him. I thought, okay, great. So I'd been fooling around after hours and putting a little tape together, and I put this demo tape together that was, I've heard it, subsequently I've listened to it, and a demo tape should be like, about 2 minutes long at the most. Mine was 14 minutes long, and it had these long speeches, like from Many Moons and other speeches that I'd done in competition, and it was quite amateurish. But the thing is, I didn't know what I was doing, and in a way, that's a good thing, because I had no consideration. There was no negative voice in my head telling me, you have no idea what you're doing, nobody's going to listen to this, you're such an amateur. I was just like, wow, this is what I got to do. And it worked, so there you go. Next thing you know, I received a letter back from her, and she had sent my tape around, and in the letter she sent back to me, she said, made a couple comments about Disney and another animation studio, and then there was a name and a phone number, and I was totally unfamiliar with the name Dawes Butler, but there was a phone number, and she said he was like Roadrunner. I thought, Roadrunner? Roadrunner doesn't have a voice, he does that, there's some electronic sound that they do. But I called him up, and his answering machine picked up. And I'd never even heard of an answering machine before. This is like the late 70s in Dayton, Ohio. We didn't have answering machines. So I listened to this, and he left this outgoing message. Anyway, long story short, he and I connected. And he would send me scripts in the mail, and I'd record my voice on a cassette player, and I'd mail it back to him. And that started this long-distance student-mentor relationship.
It's a fun story you tell in your book about that his outgoing message caught you by surprise because he was pretending to be a butler of Dawes Butler, and so you did something unexpected.
I totally picked up because, Mrs. Percival Pickles, I'm Mr. Butler's butler. Leave your name and message, wait for the beep, beep. And I listened to that and I thought, hello, Mr. Butler, this is Nancy Cartwright calling from Dayton, Ohio. See, he was from Toledo, so I thought, okay, that's good. I didn't know that at the time, but he listened to it, and I think it must have done enough, it must have impinged on him enough to warrant him calling me, because I left my phone number, and he called me. And man, when that phone rang, I was the first one, it's for me! And 5 brothers and sisters all fighting for the phone. But next thing you know, it's like it was Hollywood calling, and it was him, so that was so cool. Although he wasn't a household name, he did so many of the voices that I watched on Hanna-Barbera, which is like Huckleberry Hound, Yogi Bear, Quick Draw McGraw, Elroy Jetson, Baba Louie, Dixie of Pixie and Dixie, Cogswell Cog, Peter Potamus, the Raisin Bran Son,
Captain Crunch.
Captain Crunch, yeah, Captain Crunch. I still love Captain Crunch. Yeah.
So he's been around. He'd been around. He had done it all. Seen it all.
Oh yeah.
So
this guy, he had worked with Mel Blanc and June Foray and Don Messick, and just a pioneer in the industry. Started in radio before there was television, and that was his training. And it's like when Dawes and I would work together, when I did transfer, I transferred from Ohio University to UCLA because of the location, strictly because UCLA was so close to Beverly Hills.
Which is where he lived.
Yeah.
So did he encourage you to do that, to move out to LA?
Actually, you know what? He didn't want me to. He did not encourage me to do it. I think it was a huge responsibility on his end. He didn't want me to be disillusioned. And he just wanted me to make a smart decision, an educated decision. And I reassured him, as well as my parents, that I would be going to the university. And it's not like I would be going out and I didn't know anybody, although I didn't know anybody. But going in a university setting, it was a good environment, so because I would stay busy working on, my studies. I transferred and got into the theater department, and then started working on plays and got cast in plays. And then on the weekends, on Sundays, I'd catch the 86 bus in Westwood and ride it down Wilshire Boulevard, hop off and walk a couple blocks to his house. And his studio was his garage that was turned into a studio. He didn't teach me how to do voices. He didn't teach anybody how to do voices. What he did teach me was how to take somebody else's written word and make it my own. And that was his whole emphasis, was how to, he would call it orchestrating it, by taking the words and saying it in a way that conveyed a truthfulness. So later on, when I started auditioning for Saturday morning cartoons, I found out very quickly that somebody's idea of, like, for example, a 10-year-old boy, you would have your idea of what it is, and, the person sitting next to you would have his idea, and the other person on your right would have her idea. So the more you could give options, the better my chances of getting cast in something, because it showed versatility, and I could take direction. And I'd say probably I got that from Dawes.
Would he run practices with you? And what would that involve?
Practices, well, when I would show up on Sundays for a private lesson, it was supposed to be an hour long, but I ended up being there for like 4 hours, and I was kind of broke. I was like I was doing everything I could to pay my tuition, but he would just, I would pay him what I could pay him, and but it wasn't just me that he did that to. He kind of did that for everyone. He left a treasure box in the middle of the table, and it'd say something like $10, for the night. But if you can't, next time I'm sure it'll be fine. He was amazing. Just really the kind of guy that wanted everybody to do really, really well. And there were a lot of people that studied with him at the time that I would then later on I would run into, and we would work together on some shows. And their names are not household names, but we have that in common, that we all started with Dawes Butler.
Did he talk to you at all about the business end of doing this kind of work?
Well, we didn't talk a whole lot about it. He was concerned that I would get taken advantage of, and he didn't want that to happen. And he wrote me this poem. I've got it framed, and it's hanging up in my rec room, about something like, it was when I turned 21. It said, Blackjack and Nancy, though both 21, know the meaning of chance. Something, who wants UCL laissez-faire? I think you're a star and you'll make it, Nance. Something like that. That's what he gave me for my birthday that year, but I cherish it. He was concerned about my well-being, because I really didn't know anybody out here, and I barely knew him. It was through this long distance mentor-student relationship in the mail, through the mail. So, but I did fine. I did fine. I just got involved in what I love to do, and I did fine. But he kind of had that paternal care for me since my dad was back in Ohio.
Talk about your first professional voice acting job in LA.
Yeah.
What was it, and how did that come about?
My first professional voiceover job was playing the voice of Gloria on Richie Rich. And it was incredible because I had, up until that time that I got cast, Dawes would take me with him sometimes out to Hanna-Barbera, and I got to see him. I think at the time they were doing Popeye, and he was Wimpy on Popeye. And I remember showing up and looking at all these actors and going, I can do that, I can do that. And I wanted to do it so bad, but I mean, I wasn't there to work, I was there to observe. But their names were sort of familiar to me because working at the radio station, I would hear a commercial. I remember hearing this one commercial, it was a Photomat commercial, and I liked the sound of the announcer a lot. So I had the address of the advertising agency, and I would write a dear John kind of a letter. Dear sir, my name is Nancy Cartwright. I am 18 years old. I work at a radio station. I'm interested in doing voiceovers. What is the name of the actor that does your announcer for your Photomat commercial? And then I find out, and I wrote him, I can't remember his name now. He was the sidekick on Candid Camera, Alan Funt, and it was the guy, he had I'm sure I'll remember it before we get done here. But I remember writing him like a fan letter, and some other names would pop up of voiceover actors, and I would just go through the advertising agency to find out who they were. So Joni Gerber was another one, and then here I am, cast on Richie Rich, and Joni Gerber is playing on that show too with me. She was Irona the maid, and I'm like, oh my God. It was just sort of like, I was living the dream, you know?
And were you comfortable immediately in working in that environment professionally?
Yeah, I actually was okay, and I definitely was the new kid on the block. I was quite a bit younger than most of the people that were doing it. It's as if I was the beginning of another kind of generation of voice actors that were coming in, and advertising and animation was the door had opened to a new kind of production that was taking place in the 80s. There were the shows that were on the air at the time, lots of superhero type things, and there were more commercials and voiceovers for commercials and things like that. So it was, wow, I came in at a really good time and just stayed really busy.
Mm-hmm. And did you have representation?
At first, no. I got the job without representation, and then realized that I should probably get an agent. So I went out and started doing some interviews and showed up at this agency and said, oh, and by the way, I'm in the show. It's called Richie Rich. That was good for them, too. So I ended up signing with this agency, and they took care of me.
Are you still with the same?
No, that was some time ago.
Mm-hmm.
No, but it's just evolved. They're a very reputable agency, but my dreams and kind of my own goals sort of changed a little bit much later. I was with them many, many years, actually, and then I had some goals that changed and felt I needed to go with a different agency for different representation.
What was it like working for Hanna-Barbera, and what was your interaction, if any, with Joseph Barbera or Jack Hanna?
Well, I loved it. I loved working there. I did not own a car. I had to borrow a car from a guy in the dorm, and they didn't have GPS certainly at that time, so I would get my Thomas Brothers guide, and I became quite familiar with the layout of Los Angeles. It would take me a while to get there. I remember first times that I was going there, I would get so lost because it was like there were the 101 and the 134, and I never knew which way to go, and it was very confusing. I would give myself like 2 hours to get from UCLA just over the hill to like Cahuenga Boulevard West. But I remember driving on the lot, and I worked there for years and years, did lots of stuff for Hanna-Barbera, and got familiar with the security guards and the receptionists. Hi Nancy, and would go in and with the rest of the cast. And at one point in time, when Richie Rich, I think we were probably in our second season, I knew about the animation cells, and I remember going over to one of the other buildings and walking in and talking to somebody there and saying, "Hi, I'm Nancy Cartwright, and I do the voice of Gloria on Richie Rich." And I was wondering, do you have any of those, like the cells? Do you have any cells? Can I see? Oh yeah. So they gave me a little tour, and I met some of the animators and kind of saw what they were doing for the first time. And they gave me I think it's called like a color, it was like a color print or something, and it was the full cast, and you could see that it was written in ink, like what color of red, what color of magenta, what color of white, and they were all numbered for the paint, for the paint color. And I kept that, and I still have that framed, and it's a bit of a collector's item because at that time they were not selling the animation cells. So I started to put a little collection together of shows that I was on and would make a little extra effort to go meet some of the animators and then see, is there a cell that I could have or could buy or whatever. They always gave them to me. And then years later, when The Simpsons happened, even then they were not selling. They were not selling the celluloids. And I remember it was a Butterfingers commercial. There's another great story about that, but I'll save that. But I remember the Butterfingers commercial. I really, really wanted to get a cell of that. But I think David Silverman ended up getting me a cell of the early Tracy Ullman show of Bart. And it's not a standard size cell, but it's another little collector's item that I kind of cherish.
In the days before eBay, before they knew.
Yeah.
Could you talk a bit about the character of Gloria on Richie Rich and how you found the voice for her?
Gloria, well, I was familiar with the comic book. I remember seeing it as a kid. I wasn't like a super fan, but I was familiar with it. She was kind of wimpy from what I recall. She was very saccharine-y sweet and, "Oh, Richie, we're doomed." And it was sort of a cousin to Bart, very higher pitched than Bart, but she was a bit of a whiner. "Oh, we're doomed. We're never going to get out of this. Richie, please, save the day." That kind of a thing. And it was easy to do. The placement of my voice was not a problem. And gee whiz, it sure beat like being a receptionist at, for the president of the university or working in the accounting department. Because I was getting paid actually to do what I wanted to do.
Yeah. So at this point you could see the horizon and that this is something that could be vocation for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was the last quarter at UCLA. I was to graduate, that spring I was to graduate, and it was that spring that I got Richie Rich. And I also ended up doing I got a pilot for a TV show.
In Trouble?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, I saw that years later. Oh, so bad. So bad. No wonder it didn't go anywhere. But Doris Roberts from Everybody Loves Raymond, she played the high school principal on that. And I was a girl, and I think I was 20. I was in my early 20s playing a 16-year-old girl in high school. And what I found was that it was me plus two other actresses, and they started giving me all the good lines. That was fun, and it was a little bit, kind of a little bit off my purpose, because my purpose was really to do cartoon voices, and I didn't really have any interest on being on camera. And I had considerations about that even. And here I am cast as a lead. It was just, I went in for an interview to meet a casting director. Next thing I know, the whole place was filled with about a dozen executives from ABC, and they're having me just read a thing, and next thing you know, I got cast as a lead in a pilot. And I'm like, wow, hey Dad, guess what? I'm gonna be able to pay back my student loan.
You can't say no to that, right?
No.
And was it hard for you to switch gears between on-camera, off-camera voices and being on camera? No, actually, it's not hard at all. It's just a minor adjustment, because, you're dealing with a different set of, it's not so much rules, but in voiceover work, you just have a microphone that's like right there, and there's a lot of electronic equipment between you and the listener's ear, and all you have is your voice.
So I found out very, very quickly, I don't know that I found, I think naturally I just done it, that there is a certain energy that you have to have when you're doing a voiceover that pumps it up just a little bit bigger than life. And of course, if it's really dramatic, like you look at Who Framed Roger Rabbit, for example, and the voices on that were they were very, very cartoonish and very animated. But, you know, you look at some of the stuff today, Disney is noted for casting real little kids. And kids don't know about mic technique. They just, little girls and little boys, they just got a great little sound. But I have found in most of the work that I've done that there's a certain energy that you have to have that's bigger than life. Whereas an on-camera actor, again, I guess it depends what kind of a piece it is, but if you're doing something dramatic, you can't be cartoonish. And for me, it's just an adjustment. The difference between doing a voiceover or doing something for on camera or doing a one-woman show where you have to reach the guy in the very last row and communicate to him, you know.
But you didn't have real aspirations for being on camera then. Your love was,
yeah,
your passion was to pursue voices.
Yeah, it was never the on-camera stuff. And I remember in high school when my friends would sign my yearbook and they want to know, so are you going to be an actress? I'm like, no, I'm going to do cartoons. Okay.
Whatever, Nancy. That'll lead to something. Now, you did do another on-camera role that was really interesting, Marion Rose White. Could you talk a bit about that role and the challenges of that role?
Yeah. I had been gone that summer for about a month, and I went back to Ohio to work with Jonathan Winters. And this, you know, I had mentioned it before, and this was the opportunity that I had. I'm going, wow, he's putting together a cast, I can go do this. But the upshot of it is that while I was gone working with him, they were casting for this unusual part. And it was set, it's a true story about this woman named Marion Rose White, who, there wasn't anything really wrong with her except she had really bad eyesight. And it was set in the 30s, and her mother was just incredibly impatient. And because Marion also had a personality she was very willful and had also a unique sense of humor. But the two of them, combined with the fact that she couldn't see, put her in a position where she was a problem for the teachers. And she was a bit of a problem. So her mother got very frustrated and gave her over as a ward to the state. And at that time, I mean, and they still do, they ended up sterilizing her, thinking that was going to solve her problem. But that was really quite a challenge for me to do that part. They didn't want me to meet the actual Marion Rose White, because I guess what I had brought at the audition was exactly what they wanted. They didn't want me to start to then try to do something different. But I heard about her sense of humor, and just having worked with Jonathan Winters, I showed up with this polyurethane visor that looked like it was in the shape of lobster. And it was ridiculous. It was this red lobster visor with these eyeballs sticking out. And she had such bad eyesight that she wore these Coke bottle glasses that were, I'm not kidding, a quarter to a half an inch thick. So I put these glasses on and I couldn't see a darn thing. And I remember sitting out there, and I would take the audition piece in the reception area, and I was like this, trying to read like that. And then later on, I chickened out, though. I didn't wear the thing in, and I didn't wear the glasses in, but I brought them with me in case an opportunity came up or whatever, but I decided not to do it. So I go in, and they put me on tape, and they read with me, and they had been reading people for months when I was gone. So they were desperate. They were going to be starting work that week and hadn't found their lead girl yet. So I found out later on that it was doing this thing with the glasses and the lobster thing that got me the part. As long as I could read, I would be okay. Walked away with it.
You never know what they're looking for, huh?
Yeah.
The next guest appearance you made on television was on Cheers.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that episode, Diane's Nightmare?
It was a blast. That was so fun. I remember the audition on that too. It's like, Here's the thing about acting is that there's no real rule about I talked to him. I'm helping my niece out right now. She's 11, and trying to coach her just a little bit. And I'll go to universities and speak to the kids about successful things that I've done. But one thing that I've found is that every job that I've gotten, I've always done something. I've maintained my own integrity, and I've done something that I was just true to myself on it. They may say we want this. I can look at that, but if I feel like I want to go a different way on it, I didn't have any problem on presenting something different. I went to that audition, and there were about, I don't know, six or seven, casting people and writers, executives from the show at the audition. And I went in there, and the scene, it was just one scene, but it was a really long scene. And I'm introduced that my boyfriend is trying to murder Diane and has some obsession with her, and I'm just sort of meeting everybody. And at the end, Rhea Perlman is standing there, and she says to me, she goes, as I'm making my exit, she goes, oh, by the way, I like the choker around your neck. And I look at her and I go, I'm not wearing a choker. She goes, you will be. And that's my exit, and I leave. But at the audition, what I did was I actually exited the room, and I didn't go back. I just left, goodbye. And I kept walking, and I walked out to my car, and I drove home. And by the time I got home, the phone was ringing. You got the part. I'm like, ah.
It just stood out.
It just was the right thing to do. But you know what? There's one more thing about it, is that working on that set, it was very interesting because that was before I got Bart. That was before I got Bart. But I did find out something very interesting, is that I was a guest. I was just a guest on Cheers. I think this was their third season of Cheers, because it wasn't Kirstie Alley at the time. It was Shelley Long, yeah. But I went in there and I was a guest, and then later on, when The Simpsons happened, it seriously affected me, because I felt like you feel like a guest. You don't really feel like you're part of that family. And it's kind of, you're brand new. Nobody knows who you are. You're only there for a week. And there's not a lot of time to become super friends with people. You just kind of go in and do your job. So when we started having guests on The Simpsons, having that kind of viewpoint, I could sort of understand when later on we would have some guests that didn't quite know how to put their script on the stand, or didn't quite know that you can't turn sideways and talk to me that way, because then your mouth is not on mic.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because it's most of the guest stars that we have are not voiceovers; they're on camera, and it's a bit of a different game.
Yeah, very much, and we'll talk a lot about how it is different. But before we get to The Simpsons, I want to talk about one more role you did in your first feature film, and how you landed that role in Twilight
Zone, the movie. Yeah, that was another really fun. That was amazing. It was my very first resume, and at the top of my resume, I think I had things on there like first place in humorous interpretation. Those were my credits. I wasn't making anything up on a resume. I was like pretty brand new in town. And but under training, it said Dawes Butler. And when I went in for that audition, Joe Dante, who's the director of that segment, saw Dawes' name. And of course, Joe Dante is a huge animation buff. He ended up doing Toy Soldiers and the Looney Tunes movie and Goonies. He's hugely into animation. He saw Dawes' name and he said, "You know Dawes Butler?" He said, "Oh yeah, he's my mentor." He's like, "Oh my gosh, here, just read. If you could read it, you've got to have this part. You get eaten by a cartoon wolf. You've got to have this part." So that was it. Yeah,
that was it's on your website, actually, that little clip of you
getting eaten.
Killed
Remember
by
this?
A cartoon. Yes, we do. Now, you always seem to go back to voiceover work, and then you after being on these on-camera roles, you were called back to this first love of voiceovers, and you were making, I guess, a living doing loop groups. Yeah. And could you a lot of people won't know what that is.
Yeah.
Could you talk about what is a loop group?
Sure. There's a unique group of people that work in Hollywood, and they do what's called looping. And so any movie that you go see, they hire extras essentially to fill in the atmosphere of whoever else is in that scene. Because when you shoot the movie, you're just going to have your lead characters, and all that, say it takes place in a restaurant, you're not going to have everybody talking behind them because you really are focusing on the two leads. So later on, what happens is they have a rough copy of the film, and they hire actors to then go in and they see the scene that they're going to do. And when I did it, we would call out, "I got the lady sit with the blonde hair," or I'm like, "Yeah, you be my boyfriend." And so we just do improv, and we just make up dialogue and do the atmosphere characters, and then the sound editor will take that and mix it way down low, so you as an audience won't actually be able to decipher dialogues that we have. But it was actually great training for improv, and it was great fun, and I got a nice paycheck. And then later on, when the movie was released, we would get a residual for it. They paid for our lunches. It was like how to make a living in the industry, other than getting paid to do what you really love to do. It wasn't my that was my career. I was and I was doing it. It was very difficult to get into a loop group, and there were several of them. Now there's like dozens of them, and they stay quite busy doing all the background characters.
It's competitive.
Highly competitive. And the more languages you speak, and the more familiar you are with eras, and I guess the traditions and nomenclature of that time period, all that stuff. I mean, the real pros have files on this stuff so that they can use for it. If you're doing a movie and you're called in to do background or looping for a movie that's set in 1954, you're not going to say awesome, So that kind of stuff has to be really cared for, and the pros have all kinds of files in different time periods to use as references.
Now, this time, were you actively looking to be back on a cartoon? Was your management trying to find you work that way?
At that time, I was actually doing, I think, about 8 Saturday morning cartoon shows. I was quite prolific doing this stuff. I never waned from doing the voiceover work. I just started adding on camera to it. And you mentioned a few things, and there was Empty Nest and Mr. Belvedere and a couple other on-camera things that I had done, and some more movies of the week. I did a forgettable film called Flesh and Blood, but got to go to Spain to shoot that with Jennifer Jason Leigh and Tom Burlinson. That was fun. Rutger Hauer. Oh, my God, he was huge. Hi! He was a giant. I showed up on the set, and it was his birthday, and he took everybody out to dinner for his birthday. That was an experience. Paul Verhoeven was the director. But so I was kind of juggling, actually. It was kind of 2 separate careers, but the passion was definitely the voices.
So now, how did you hear about The Simpsons read, and can you talk about the first audition?
Yeah.
In detail. Again.
Let's see. At the time...
And it was actually, I have to interrupt, but it was this week it was March 13th, 1987.
No way!
Yeah, it's in your book. So
oh my
it's
God.
This week, 24 years ago.
Wow, cool.
Now, how did you hear about it even? Did your agent find it?
My agent told me about it and said, hey, they're looking for, they're casting for this girl. She's an 8-year-old girl. And I said, well, what's the description? 8-year-old middle child. I said, was it a show? No, it's not really a show. It's called an interstitial. What's that? Well, it's like right before the commercial and then right after the commercial. It's to take you out of the Tracy Ullman show and then do the commercial and then bring you back into her show. And I said, so it's not really a show? Well, no, not really. They're these like 30-second, 1-minute vignettes. And I said, oh, okay. All right, fine. So I popped in my, Rick James, she's a super freak. Popped that into my little cassette player in my car. My little Honda.
Spud. Yeah. Spud.
No, at this time by now I actually could afford to buy a car. I drove it was a Honda Prelude, And I remember driving it across over the hill over to the Fox lot, and went in there for the audition, and I saw the audition piece was there, but see, there was Lisa Simpson and a picture of her with a monologue, but right next to her was Bart. And I picked up Lisa and I read it. I thought, oh, okay. All right, well, that's cute. I see that, but what's this? 10 years old, school-hating underachiever, and proud of it. And that alone, the description alone was like, whoa, that sounds way more fun than 8-year-old middle child. And of course, I mean, over the years, what Yardley has done with her, and she's just like every parent's dream of what they want their daughter to be like. She's such a leader. But at the time, I'm like, boring. Bart just sounded more fun. So I went in, and Matt was there. It was just Matt Groening and me. And he shook my hand. I said, hey, they wanted me to read for Lisa Simpson, but I really would like to do Bart. Do you mind? Can I do Bart? And he's like, no, fine, that's fine. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. And boom, that's it. He goes, whoa, that's him, that's it. You got the part. I'm like, whoa, cool.
And I mean, is there any consciousness about how you came up with that voice, that intonation, any of it?
You know what? This is so bizarre, but typically, I mean, at that point in time, this was in '87, and up till then, I mean, I had started, for 6 years, I'd been working in the industry, and I had learned to give them options, because I didn't want to just show that I can only do it one way. But with Bart, there was a certainty on him, and that's all I gave. I mean, it was just bam, that's the sound. And I can count on one hand how many times that has happened since. That's rare, but whatever it was, hey, fate or luck or just being at the right place at the right time and being ready for it. But Matt said, bam, you got it. And Eddie Murphy and Mike Myers walked away, and I got the job. I'm kidding.
Oh. That would have been news if that was and was there ever, I mean, you've done children's voices as an adult. Is that unusual in your profession that there are, that I heard that there's like a small number of people who can do it well? Was it ever a question that you could do a child?
No, I don't think there was any question that I could do a child. At the time that I had moved from Ohio and was starting to pursue this career, like in the early 80s, again, animation was at a different place. It was just kind of moving into more commercial, more opportunities. And then there wasn't even, I'm trying to think, there wasn't cable TV yet. It was just Saturday morning fare. And, preceding me, June Foray, was Rocky J. Squirrel, so she did a boy voice. And it wasn't so, I never considered it, I never thought of myself as being any kind of a pioneer at all. It's just what I did, and I just did what I did,
And you still do it well.
Thanks.
The original sketches were very different from what we know The Simpsons to be now. What did you think of them when you saw the manifestation of The Simpsons?
Oh, they were wacky. They were crazy funny, though. The very first one, I think, was, I remember it was Good Night, or it was bedtime stories or something, and Marge and Homer are telling, I think it was the Rockabye Baby. She went, Rockabye Baby, and they show a cradle, and then the eyes pop in, bedbugs. We could picture what it was. I'm trying to remember, see if that was in '87. Yeah, there wasn't anything at all like it on television, and I wasn't really looking into the future at all of this being the possibility of it even being a half-hour show. We were just doing what we were doing. The thing that I thought was a bit odd, though, was that we didn't do it in a regular studio. We did it on the Tracy Ullman soundstage, and they had us up the bleachers, and we were in the production booth where the sound editors and the producers were calling the shots for the cameras. And this to me was like, oh my God, this is such Amateurville. These people have no idea what they're doing. And Dan and me would have to share a microphone, and I would say my line, and I have to move out of the way so that he can say his line. And again, though, I kept my big mouth shut. And I'm so glad I did, because it just to then be kicked off. I don't know if they would have fired me for being a troublemaker or being too much like Bart, but I'm glad I just sort of like, let's just see what happens here. But it took us 2 hours to do 2 minutes. You know, which,
Really?
yeah, it was like kind of crazy, but I was also getting paid more money at that time than I had ever been paid before on a Saturday morning show, because this was prime time and it's a different contract. I had nothing. There was no negotiation. It's like it was just, scale. Mm-hmm. It was the union scale that had been established, and I'm like, whoa, okay, just keep your big mouth shut.
Had you seen the Tracy Ullman show? Were you familiar with
Yeah.
Dan and Julie?
Oh yeah.
And can you talk about meeting them for the first time?
Oh boy, I'd gone. The show, they started showing the little clips, and I remember showing up, and I wanted to be there and just kind of be in that experience. And even the warm-up person introduced me, but the audience at the time, it was no big deal. I think people looked at me, and you know, it was interesting because we were still being discovered. But I met Dan and Julie and Tracy, and I just shook their hands and just says, really nice meeting you. And especially, I guess it was Julie that really stood out more than the others because of her background and being Brenda on Rhoda, and because I knew who she was. It was, I had admired her, and here she was now cast as my mom.
And describe Bart Simpson. In those initial interstitials, describe the character.
Well, at that time, I think he was pretty much one note. He was just trouble. He was just recalcitrant and always picking on Lisa, trying to spook her, and I didn't have any problem with that. I thought it was fine. And again, I wasn't thinking, gee whiz, if they were really smart, they'd develop this. But I think that just sort of happened. My own understanding is that we started getting fan mail. I mean, not me personally, but the show started getting fan mail. A lot of the fans for the Tracy Ullman show were commenting about this odd Simpson family, and we started getting so much fan mail that it just, when the public demands something like that, it's just a cue to go with that. Mm-hmm. So then I was told they were going to develop it into a half hour, and Bart was going to be the star, and I was like, wow, cool.
He was the early breakout character.
Yeah.